The sun, a benevolent tyrant in the cloudless Los Angeles sky, cast a golden sheen over the infinity pool, its surface mirroring the calculated calm I had meticulously curated for my life. But that morning, a single text message, a casual string of words not meant for my eyes, shattered the illusion like a stray bullet through a masterpiece. It wasn't just the betrayal that stung, it was the sheer, unadulterated cliché of it all. The late nights, the hushed phone calls, the sudden, almost comical obsession with his physical appearance. All the puzzle pieces I'd subconsciously collected now clicked into a sickeningly clear picture. He wasn't just cheating, he was building a whole other life, a life financed by my family's legacy. But he underestimated the woman he married. He saw a trophy, a pretty face to adorn his arm at galas. He forgot I was the daughter of a titan, a woman who understood the intricacies of power and the devastating beauty of a perfectly executed plan. As he slept, blissfully unaware in our bespoke fret linens, I became a ghost in our own home, a phantom of vengeance with a singular, audacious goal: to dismantle his empire, brick by gilded brick, and leave him with nothing but the echoes of his own deceit. This is the story of how I took everything, and then I vanished. Our life, to the untrained eye, was a meticulously crafted Fabergé egg, exquisite, opulent, and impossibly perfect. We lived in a sprawling Bel Air mansion, a minimalist marvel of glass and white marble that clung to the hillside, offering a panoramic vista of a city that worshipped at the altar of success. Our neighbors were tech billionaires and movie stars, people whose names were spoken in hushed, reverent tones. My husband, Richard Worthington, was the charismatic CEO of Ethelred Holdings, a name that sounded ancestral and solid, a deliberate choice on his part. He had built it from a modest tech startup into a formidable private equity firm, or so the glowing profiles in Forbes and the Wall Street Journal would have you believe. The truth was a little more complex. Richard was charming, devastatingly so. He had a smile that could disarm world leaders and a mind that moved with the swift, predatory grace of a shark. He was ambitious, a quality I had once admired, mistaking it for passion. But the seed money, the initial crucial injection of capital that had allowed his sapling of a company to grow into a mighty oak, had come from my father. Richard was the gardener, but the soil, the very land upon which his empire was built, was mine, a fact he seemed to conveniently forget. I am Catherine Ainsworth Worthington. Before I was a Worthington, I was an Ainsworth, a name that carried the weight of old money, of shipping magnates and railroad barons. My inheritance wasn't just a number in a bank account. It was a sprawling, intricate web of trusts, properties, and controlling shares in companies so large they were practically institutions. I was raised not to be a princess in a tower, but the queen of my own kingdom. My father, a man whose love was measured in stock options and lessons on corporate governance, had taught me to read a balance sheet before I could read a novel. I understood the language of power, of assets and liabilities, of leverage and hostile takeovers. It was a language Richard spoke fluently, but he never seemed to realize that I was a native speaker. For 10 years, our marriage had been a seamless partnership, or so I'd let myself believe. I was the elegant, supportive wife, the perfect hostess who could charm a recalcitrant board member or a stuffy diplomat with equal ease. I curated our life, from the thread count of our sheets to the vintage of the wine served at our galas. I managed the homes, the Bel Air estate, the Park Avenue penthouse, the villa in Tuscany. I sat on the boards of charities, my presence lending a veneer of philanthropic grace to Richard's ruthless corporate image. I was, in essence, the chief operating officer of our gilded life, a role I had slipped into so naturally that I hadn't noticed it had become a cage. The cracks at first were hairline, almost invisible, a new preoccupation with his phone, which was now perpetually angled away from me. Late nights at the office became more frequent, his excuses more elaborate. Finalizing the merger with the German conglomerate, darling, it's a beast. Or, putting out fires with the Tokyo branch. You know how they are. I, steeped in the world of corporate intrigue, knew that mergers and international crises didn't typically require whispered, late-night phone calls that ended abruptly the moment I entered the room. Then came the changes in his appearance. Richard had always been handsome, But now there was a new, almost frantic, attention to his physique. He hired a new personal trainer, a former Israeli Special Forces operative named Avi, who pushed him through grueling workouts at dawn. He started getting his teeth whitened, a subtle but noticeable shift. He bought a new watch, a Patek Philippe Grandmaster chime, a piece so ostentatious and complex it was practically a declaration of a midlife crisis. It wasn't his usual style. Richard preferred the understated elegance of a vintage Jaeger-LeCoultre. "It's a statement piece," he'd said when I'd raised an eyebrow, his voice a little too loud, a little too jovial. Projects power. I remember one evening about 6 months before the world imploded. We were hosting a dinner for a Japanese investor. I had chosen a simple, elegant black Dior gown, my only adornment the Ainsworth diamonds, a cascade of ice around my neck. Richard, usually a model of classic tailoring, appeared in a Tom Ford suit that was just a little too tight, a silk shirt unbuttoned, one button too many. He was preening, a peacock in full display, but his performance wasn't for me. I watched him across the long, candlelit table, his laughter a fraction too boisterous, his anecdotes a touch too self-congratulatory. He was playing a part, and for the first time, I felt like I was in the audience, not on the stage with him. Later that night, as I was taking off the diamonds, I caught my own reflection in the vanity mirror. My face, usually serene and composed, looked tired. The diamonds felt cold against my skin. I looked at the vast, silent bedroom, at the king-sized bed that felt more like a continent than a shared space. A profound, aching loneliness washed over me. It was a feeling I hadn't allowed myself to acknowledge for a very long time. The final discordant note in this symphony of suspicion came in the form of a credit card statement. I still managed our personal finances, a holdover from the early days of our marriage. It was a habit I'd never relinquished, much to Richard's occasional annoyance. Tucked away amongst the usual charges for Savile Row suits and exorbitant restaurant bills was a charge from a boutique jeweler I'd never heard of, Bijoux de Nuit in Paris. The amount was significant, but it was the item description that made my blood run cold. Custom engraved Le Coeur de la Mer sapphire pendant. My heart hammered against my ribs. Richard had never bought me sapphires. He knew I preferred diamonds and emeralds. And the name, the Heart of the Sea, it was so ridiculously, painfully romantic, so utterly out of character for the man who had once given me a portfolio of tech stocks for our anniversary. I confronted him, choosing my moment carefully, when he was relaxed, a glass of Macallan 25 in his hand. I kept my voice light, casual. "Darling, what's this charge from Bijoux de Nuit? I don't recognize it." He didn't even flinch. His eyes, the color of a stormy sea, met mine in the reflection of the floor-to-ceiling window. "Ah, that. It's a gift from my mother. Her birthday is next month. I wanted to get her something special." It was a perfect lie. Plausible, thoughtful even. But his mother was allergic to sapphires, a fact he had conveniently forgotten. I knew it, and he knew that I knew it. A silent, undeclared war had just been declared between us. The gilded cage had begun to rust from the inside out, and I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that I would have to be the one to break it open, and I would not be the one left bleeding in the wreckage. The lie about the sapphire pendant hung in the air between us for weeks, a toxic, invisible cloud. On the surface, nothing changed. We still moved through the elegant choreography of our lives, the charity galas, the weekend trips to our Napa estate, the quiet dinners where the silence was punctuated only by the clinking of silverware against porcelain. But beneath the placid surface, a frantic current was pulling me under. I had become a detective in my own home, a spy in my own marriage. Denial is a powerful sedative. For a while, I allowed myself to believe his lie. Maybe he had forgotten about his mother's allergy. Maybe it was a mistake. But the unraveling thread had been pulled, and the tapestry of our marriage was beginning to fray at the edges. The signs, once subtle, now seemed to blare like emergency sirens. His phone, a sleek, custom-designed Virtu, became an extension of his body. It was always in his hand, on his desk, or on the nightstand on his side of the bed, screen down. He had changed the passcode, a simple 4-digit PIN replaced with a complex alphanumeric sequence. Once, I saw him texting furiously as he walked from the living room to his study, a small, secretive smile playing on his lips. When he saw me watching, the smile vanished, replaced by a mask of corporate seriousness. "Just dealing with a volatile market in Asia," he'd muttered, not meeting my eye. The business trips became more frequent and to more glamorous locations. A weekend in Monaco for a crypto conference, a 4-day trip to St. Bart's to scout resort investment opportunities. He would return with a deep tan and a litany of stories about boardrooms and negotiations, but his eyes held a distant, satisfied gleam that had nothing to do with business. He brought me gifts, of course, a Hermes scarf from Paris, a Bulgari bracelet from Rome. They were peace offerings, guilt payments. They felt like blood money. My best friend, a sharp-witted art gallery owner named Isabella Rossi, was the first person I confided in. We met for lunch at our usual spot, a sun-drenched table at the Polo Lounge, a place so steeped in Hollywood history you could almost feel the ghosts of movie stars past. "He's having an affair, Izzy," I said, the words tasting like poison in my mouth. I had barely touched my Cobb salad. Isabella, her perfectly manicured fingers paused around her glass of rosé, looked at me with her intelligent, sympathetic eyes. "Are you sure, Elle? I mean, really sure. He bought a sapphire necklace for his mother, who is allergic to sapphires. He's been going to St. Bart's for business. He's treating his phone like it's the nuclear football. What do you think?" "Men are idiots," she said, taking a sip of her wine. "But Richard has always been a particularly arrogant brand of idiot. Who is she?" "I don't know," I whispered, the admission shaming me. "That's the worst part. I'm living in the dark. I feel like a guest in my own life." "Then you need to turn on the lights," Isabella said, her voice firm. "You are Catherine Ainsworth. You do not sit in the dark while some 2-bit social climber redecorates your life. You need information. You need leverage." She was right. My father had always taught me that knowledge wasn't just power, it was ammunition. That evening, I did something I had never done before. I betrayed Richard's trust, a trust he had already shattered. I hired a private investigator. I didn't go through the usual channels. I used a discreet security firm that my father's company had on retainer, a company that specialized in corporate espionage and high-net-worth individuals. The man they sent was a former Mossad agent named Ari Ben David. He was quiet, unassuming, with watchful eyes that missed nothing. We met in a sterile, anonymous office in a downtown skyscraper. I felt a pang of shame, of sordidness, as I sat across from him, detailing the intimate betrayals of my marriage. "I need to know everything," I told him, my voice colder and harder than I had ever heard it. "Who she is, where they go, what he spends on her. I want bank statements, travel records, everything. Be discreet. Richard is not a fool." "Madam Worthington," Ari said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. "Fools are the easiest to catch. It is the arrogant men who believe they are clever who leave the widest trails." While Ari began his silent, invisible work, I continued to play the part of the oblivious wife. It was the most difficult performance of my life. I would sit across from Richard at dinner, listening to him talk about his day, about his triumphs and his frustrations, all the while picturing him with another woman. I would smile and nod, my mind a maelstrom of anger and hurt. The rage was a living thing inside me, a cold, hard knot in my stomach. One night he came home late, smelling of expensive champagne and a perfume that wasn't mine. It was a floral scent, something light and youthful. My perfume was a custom blend from a small Parisian perfumerie, a complex, smoky scent of amber and oud. He was humming as he loosened his tie, a jaunty, carefree tune. "Good day at the office?" I asked, my voice preternaturally calm. I was sitting up in bed, a book open on my lap, its pages unread. "Incredible," he said, his back to me as he undressed. "We closed the deal on that biotech firm. It's going to be huge, a real game changer." He tossed his shirt onto a valet stand. I saw a faint smear of pink lipstick on the collar. I felt the blood drain from my face. It was such a cliché, so insultingly careless. He wasn't even trying to hide it anymore. He was flaunting it, confident in my ignorance, in my complacency. That night I didn't sleep. I lay beside him in the vast, cold bed, listening to the sound of his even breathing. He was a stranger to me, a man I had loved and built a life with, now a monster sleeping peacefully beside me. The hurt was still there, a deep, gaping wound. But something else was beginning to grow in its place, a cold, clear, and unyielding resolve. The next morning, Ari Ben David sent me a single, encrypted email. The subject line was simply, "Package delivered." I opened it with trembling hands. It was a dossier, a digital file filled with photographs, flight manifests, hotel receipts, and credit card statements. The woman's name was Sophia Dubois. She was 26 years old, a former model turned influencer. The photos were a series of candid shots of her and Richard, laughing as they boarded a private jet at Van Nuys Airport, kissing on the balcony of a suite at the Hôtel de Paris in Monaco, strolling hand in hand on a private beach in the Maldives. He looked younger with her, carefree, a man without a care in the world. He was wearing the Patek Philippe watch in every picture. The financial records were even more damning. He had leased a penthouse for her in a luxury high-rise in Century City. He had bought her a brand new Porsche Taycan. He was paying for her extravagant shopping sprees at Chanel and Valentino. And there it was on a receipt from Bijoux de Nuit, the Le Coeur de la Mer sapphire pendant. The custom engraving read, "To my Sophia, my true north." Forever, R. I scrolled through the images, the documents, the irrefutable proof of his betrayal. The pain was physical, a sharp, stabbing sensation in my chest. But as I read on, the pain began to morph, to transmute into something else. It was the cold, clarifying fire of rage. He wasn't just cheating on me. He was using my money, my family's legacy, to finance his sordid little affair. He was building a new life for himself on the foundations of my heritage. The unraveling thread had led me to the heart of the labyrinth, and there I had found the Minotaur. And I knew with a certainty that settled deep in my bones that I was not Theseus. I was not there to slay the beast. I was there to burn the labyrinth to the ground. The time for sorrow was over. The time for war had begun. The dossier from Ari Ben David was a digital hand grenade, and for 2 days I carried it with me, a ticking time bomb in the elegant confines of my Hermes handbag. I had the truth, cold, hard, and irrefutable. But knowledge is one thing, detonation is another. I needed the right moment, the right catalyst to ignite the righteous fury that was now simmering just beneath my placid exterior. The universe, it seemed, agreed. It happened on a Tuesday, a day of suffocating, oppressive heat, the kind that makes the very air in Los Angeles feel thick and heavy. Richard was working from home, a rare occurrence. He had taken over the library, a magnificent 2-story room paneled in dark walnut, its shelves lined with first editions I had spent years collecting. He was on a conference call, his voice a smooth, confident baritone, echoing through the cavernous space. I was in the master suite, ostensibly organizing my closet, but in reality my mind was a whirlwind of half-formed plans and vengeful fantasies. I needed a document from the library safe, a deed for one of our properties. It was a legitimate reason to interrupt him. As I approached the library, his voice grew louder, more animated. He was laughing, a sound that had once been the soundtrack to my happiness, but now grated on my nerves like nails on a chalkboard. No, you don't understand," he was saying, his voice dropping to a more intimate, conspiratorial tone. "She has no idea. She's too busy planning her next charity ball. God love her. She's the perfect corporate wife, handles all the domestic stuff, leaves me free to handle the important things." A wave of nausea washed over me. Domestic stuff. Was that all I was to him? The manager of his household, the curator of his public image? I stood frozen outside the heavy oak doors, my hand hovering over the handle. "Of course I love you," he said, his voice now a low, husky murmur. "You're my future, Sophia. This is just a business arrangement, a very, very profitable one, but it has a sunset clause. Soon, my love, very soon." The air was sucked from my lungs. A sunset clause. He was planning to leave me. He had an exit strategy, a timeline. I was not his wife. I was a contract, an investment, a means to an end. The rage, the cold, clarifying rage I had been nursing now erupted, a volcanic inferno of molten fury. I pushed the doors open. He was sitting at the massive mahogany desk, his back to me, looking out at the perfectly manicured gardens. His Virtu phone was on the desk beside him, connected to a set of AirPods. He hadn't heard me enter. He was still murmuring into the phone. "I have to go, my love. The dragon might be stirring. I'll text you later. I love you." He ended the call and let out a contented sigh. He swiveled in his leather chair, a self-satisfied smile on his face. The smile vanished the moment he saw me. He looked like a deer caught in the headlights of an oncoming freight train. "Catherine," he stammered, his face paling. I didn't hear you come in." "Evidently," I said, my voice as cold and sharp as a shard of glass. I walked slowly, deliberately, toward the desk. My eyes were locked on his phone. He followed my gaze and a flicker of panic crossed his face. He made a move to grab it, but I was faster. I snatched the phone from the desk. It was unlocked. He had been so sure of my ignorance, so confident in his deception, that he hadn't even bothered to lock it after his call. "Give me that," he said, his voice a low growl. He stood up, his 6'3" frame towering over me. It was a tactic that had always worked in the boardroom, an attempt to intimidate, to dominate. It had no effect on me now. "I don't think so," I said, my eyes scanning the screen. The message thread with Sophia was right there at the top. I opened it. My hands were surprisingly steady as I scrolled up, my mind a cold, efficient machine, processing the information, storing away the evidence. It was all there, a sickeningly sweet chronicle of their affair. "Sophia, I miss you. This big bed is so empty without you." "Richard, I'll be there soon, my love. Just have to get through this pointless dinner. She's wearing the emeralds tonight. You'd look so much better in them." My stomach churned. The emeralds were a gift from my father on my 30th birthday. "Sophia, are you sure she doesn't suspect anything?" "Richard, positive. She's smart, but not in the ways that matter. She lives in a bubble of privilege and charity luncheons. She has no idea what it takes to run an empire, or to please a man like me. Sophia, I can't wait for us to be together, properly, no more hiding." "Richard, the pieces are moving, my love. The final transfers are almost complete. Once everything is consolidated under the holding company, I can untangle myself from the Ainsworth Trust. It's a delicate operation, but the prize is worth it. You are worth it. We'll have everything, and she'll have, well, she'll be comfortable. I'm not a monster. A monster." He was talking about untangling himself from my family's money, from the very source of his power and wealth, as if it were his right. He was planning to gut my inheritance, leave me with a pittance, and ride off into the sunset with his 26-year-old influencer. The most damning message was the last one he had sent, just before his call. "Richard, the jet is booked for Friday. Anguilla, just the two of us. Pack something, or don't. Anguilla." He had told me he had a board meeting in Zurich. I looked up from the phone, my eyes meeting his. The fear on his face was now mixed with a dawning horror. He knew that I had seen everything. The carefully constructed facade of his life had just been bulldozed. "So," I said, my voice dangerously quiet, "a sunset clause." He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. He just stared at me, his face ashen. "She's smart, but not in the ways that matter," I quoted, my voice dripping with venom. "You have no idea, Richard. You have no idea what ways matter to me now." I turned and walked out of the library, his phone still clutched in my hand. I didn't run. I didn't scream. The time for histrionics was over. The pain was still there, a deep, primal wound, but now it was fuel. I walked up the grand, sweeping staircase of our beautiful hollow home, my mind already working, my father's lessons on strategy and leverage echoing in my ears. He had called me the dragon. He was about to find out just how much fire I could breathe. The game had been revealed, the players were on the board, and I was about to change all the rules. He thought he was building an empire. I was about to show him that I could tear one down, and I would do it with a smile on my face. The hours that followed the discovery were a blur of preternatural calm. The storm of emotion, the grief, the rage, the humiliation had passed, leaving in its wake a landscape of icy, crystalline clarity. Richard remained locked in the library, making frantic phone calls, no doubt trying to do damage control, to salvage the unsalvageable. I let him spin his webs. A spider is no match for a wrecking ball. I retreated to my sanctuary, a white-on-white sitting room that overlooked the city, a space Richard had always found too sterile, too cold. For me, it was a blank canvas, and in that moment, it was where I would design my masterpiece of destruction. I took his phone, the sleek Vertu that was the repository of his deceit, and connected it to a small, powerful device Ari had provided me. In minutes, every text, every email, every photo, every call log was downloaded and encrypted, a perfect, pristine record of his betrayal. Evidence. Ammunition. My first call was not to a divorce lawyer, it was to Julian Croft. Julian was not just any lawyer, he was a legend, a silver-haired shark in a Brioni suit who haunted the courtrooms of New York and Los Angeles. His specialty was not just high-net-worth divorce, but what he called corporate marital restructuring. He dismantled the intertwined financial lives of the ultra-rich with the precision of a surgeon and the ruthlessness of a warlord. His fees were astronomical, but he had never lost a case for a client he believed in. More importantly, he had been my father's lawyer, and his loyalty to the Ainsworth name was absolute. I reached him on his private line. "Julian," I said, my voice steady, "it's Catherine Worthington. I need you. Now." There was no hesitation. "My jet will be in Van Nuys in 3 hours. We'll meet at my LA office at 4 o'clock. Tell me nothing more over the phone." The next 2 hours were a whirlwind of calculated activity. I drank a glass of iced water, the cold shock grounding me. I changed out of my casual loungewear and into a steel gray Armani pantsuit. I put on my diamond stud earrings, small, sharp, and understated. I was dressing for battle. I walked into Richard's dressing room, a space the size of a small apartment, lined with his Savile Row suits and racks of handmade shoes. I went to his safe, hidden behind a full-length mirror. I knew the combination. It was the date his first startup went public. So predictable. Inside, among the bearer bonds and spare watches, was what I was looking for. A series of hard drives and ledgers. Richard was old school in some ways. He believed in keeping a physical backup of his most sensitive financial data. He called it his black box. I took it all. At precisely 4 o'clock, I walked into Julian Croft's office, a minimalist area on the top floor of a Century City skyscraper. Julian was standing by the window, a tall, imposing figure against the backdrop of the city. He turned as I entered, his pale blue eyes assessing me. "Catherine," he said, his voice a smooth, comforting rumble, "you look just like your father when he was about to launch a hostile takeover." "That's exactly what this is, Julian," I said, placing the hard drives, the ledgers, and Richard's phone on the polished surface of his vast desk. A hostile takeover of my own life. For the next 5 hours, we worked. Julian's team, a hand-picked group of forensic accountants and legal eagles, descended on the evidence like a pack of wolves. They dissected Richard's financial empire, following the money trails, cross-referencing the ledgers with the data from his phone. What emerged was a picture of deceit far more elaborate and audacious than I could have imagined. Richard hadn't just been cheating on me emotionally, he had been systematically cheating me financially for years. He had created a complex web of shell corporations, offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands and Liechtenstein, and holding companies with opaque ownership structures. His plan, the one he had mentioned to Sophia, was to slowly and meticulously transfer assets that were legally marital property, and in many cases, assets derived directly from Ainsworth Capital, into entities that were solely under his control. He was creating a shadow empire, a financial lifeboat for himself, preparing for the day he would enact his sunset clause. "He's been bleeding you dry, Catherine," Julian said, his face grim as he looked at a flow chart on a large screen that detailed the flow of money. "He used your family's capital as leverage to acquire new companies. Then he'd load those companies with debt, pay himself exorbitant management fees through a shell corp in Panama, and declare the original company bankrupt. It's sophisticated, it's ruthless, and it's highly illegal. A cold fury settled in my heart. The humiliation of the affair was one thing. This was a betrayal on an entirely different level. He had used my love and my trust as a tool to commit grand larceny against my own family. But he made a mistake, Julian continued, a predatory glint in his eye. A fatal one. He pointed to a document on the screen. It was a power of attorney, a document I had signed years ago, at his request. He had told me it was a formality, something needed to allow him to manage our joint investments more efficiently. I, in my trusting haze, had signed it without a second thought. This power of attorney gives you sweeping control over his assets, both personal and corporate, in the event of his incapacitation or a material breach of fiduciary duty, Julian explained. His systematic, fraudulent transfer of marital assets into his own secret accounts is a material breach of the highest order. It's the legal equivalent of him handing you the keys to his kingdom. A slow, cold smile spread across my face. So, what you're saying is… I'm saying, Julian interrupted, his own smile matching mine, that for the next 72 hours until he can get a judge to file an injunction, you have the legal authority to do whatever you want with his assets. You can transfer every stock, every bond, every dollar from every account. You can seize control of Ethelred Holdings and all its subsidiaries. You can take everything. The audacity of it was breathtaking. It was a move of such corporate ruthlessness that my father would have applauded. He thought you were the domestic stuff, Julian said, quoting the words I had told him from Richard's phone call. He saw you as the CEO of the household. He forgot you were the chairman of the board. The plan was hatched with military precision. Julian's team drafted the necessary documents, the transfer orders, the letters to the boards of directors of every company Richard controlled. They worked through the night, fueled by coffee and a shared sense of righteous purpose. I felt no guilt, no remorse. Richard had declared war. He had planned to leave me with a comfortable pittance. I was about to leave him with nothing but the shirt on his back. And even that, I mused, was probably paid for with my money. As dawn broke over the city, I signed the final document, my signature a sharp, angry scrawl. It was done. The complex machinery of my revenge was now in motion. The transfers would be executed electronically, a silent digital storm that would wipe Richard Worthington off the financial map. I left Julian's office and stepped out into the cool morning air. The city was just beginning to wake up, a sprawling beast of concrete and ambition. I looked at it not as a resident, but as a conqueror. Richard had underestimated me. He had seen a wife, a hostess, a pretty face. He had failed to see the daughter of a titan, the woman who had just become the architect of his ruin. The sun was rising, and for the first time in a very long time, I felt like I was rising with it. I returned to the Bel Air estate as the morning sun was just beginning to burn off the marine layer. The house was quiet, imbued with a tomb-like silence that seemed to mock the opulence of its surroundings. The air was thick with unspoken words and shattered trust. I felt like a stranger in my own home, a ghost walking through the museum of a life that was no longer mine. I found Richard in the living room. He was sitting on one of the white silk sofas, staring blankly at the cold, empty fireplace. He hadn't slept. His usually immaculate suit was rumpled, his tie loosened, and his face was a pale, haggard mask of desperation. The alpha predator of the boardroom was gone, replaced by a cornered, frightened animal. He looked up as I entered, his eyes filled with a mixture of fear and a flicker of desperate hope. He probably thought I had come to negotiate, to scream, to cry, to engage in the messy emotional fallout he could manipulate. "Catherine," he began, his voice hoarse, "we need to talk. I know you're angry. You have every right to be. I made a terrible mistake. I can explain." "There's nothing to explain, Richard," I said, my voice devoid of any emotion. I remained standing, a deliberate power move. I did not want to be on his level. I wanted to tower over the ruins of his world. I saw the texts. I heard the phone call. I know about Sophia. I know about the penthouse, the Porsche, the trips to Anguilla, and I know about the sunset clause. Each word was a hammer blow, and I saw him flinch with every impact. The hope in his eyes died, replaced by a sullen, defensive anger. "So what do you want?" he sneered, his arrogance a reflex, a last-ditch defense mechanism. "Half? Is that it? You want to take me for half? Fine. Take it. You'll be a very rich woman." I almost laughed. The sheer, unadulterated hubris of him. He still thought he was in control. He still thought the assets were his to give. "You're not listening, Richard," I said calmly. I walked over to the bar and poured myself a glass of water, my hand perfectly steady. "I don't want half. The division of assets is already complete." He stared at me, a flicker of confusion in his eyes. "What are you talking about? We haven't even spoken to lawyers yet." "Oh, but I have," I said, taking a slow sip of water. "I spent the night with Julian Croft and his team." The mention of Julian's name had the desired effect. A wave of genuine fear washed over Richard's face. He knew who Julian was. He knew what he was capable of. "And we found something very interesting," I continued, pacing slowly before the vast floor-to-ceiling windows. "A rather broad power of attorney you had me sign a few years ago. The one you said was just a formality. It gave me complete control in the event of a material breach of fiduciary duty. And your systematic, fraudulent siphoning of our marital assets into your little constellation of shell corporations was a breach of epic proportions." He was on his feet now, his face a mask of disbelief and dawning horror. "You wouldn't," he whispered. "You couldn't." "I could and I did," I said, turning to face him, my eyes as cold and hard as the diamonds in my ears. "As of 6 a.m. this morning, every stock, every bond, every liquid asset in every account bearing your name or the name of one of your shell companies was transferred. The accounts in the Cayman Islands, in Liechtenstein, in Panama, they've all been liquidated." He staggered back as if I had physically struck him. "Ethelred Holdings," he stammered. "My company. Our company, Richard. It was built with Ainsworth Capital, a fact you seem to forget. But don't worry, it's in good hands. As the new majority shareholder, my first act was to convene an emergency board meeting. They voted unanimously to accept your resignation, effective immediately. Your golden parachute has been, shall we say, rescinded due to gross misconduct and fraud. The board is also considering pressing criminal charges." He sank back onto the sofa, his mouth agape, his face the color of ash. He looked from me to the opulent room around him, the Picassos on the wall, the custom-made furniture, as if seeing it all for the first time. "The houses," he croaked, "the cars, the jet, the Bel Air estate and the Park Avenue penthouse are in a trust controlled by the Ainsworth family. Your access has been revoked. The security team is on its way to escort you from the premises. The cars were all leased through Ethelred Holdings. They are being repossessed. As for the jet, I'll be needing that." The finality of it, the sheer, breathtaking scope of his ruin, finally seemed to penetrate his thick skull. The arrogance, the anger, it all drained away, leaving behind a hollow, broken man. "Why?" he whispered, his voice cracking. It was a pathetic sound. "After all these years, why do this?" I walked over to him and stood there, looking down at the man I had once loved, the man who had so casually and cruelly planned to discard me. "You asked the wrong question, Richard," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper. "It's not why, it's what. You told your mistress you weren't a monster, but you are. You're a thief. You wrapped your greed in the language of love and called it a marriage. You tried to steal my future, my family's legacy. You just never imagined that I was a better player. You saw a trophy wife. You forgot you married a queen. You thought this was your kingdom, but you were just a guest, and your stay is over." I turned and walked away, not looking back. I could feel his eyes on me, the weight of his utter devastation. But I felt nothing. No pity, no remorse, just the cold, clean satisfaction of a perfectly executed plan. As I reached the grand foyer, I heard a single, guttural sob behind me. It was the sound of an empire crumbling to dust, and it was the sweetest sound I had ever heard. The finality of my last words to Richard echoed in the cavernous foyer as I walked away. I didn't look back. The image of his broken form on that white silk sofa was seared into my mind, a monument to his own spectacular self-destruction. There was no triumph in that final moment, only a profound and chilling emptiness. The war was over, the victory absolute, but the battlefield was my own life. My pre-packed suitcases, a set of sleek, custom-made Rimowa trunks in a discreet charcoal gray, were already waiting by the door, placed there by a silent and loyal member of the household staff. My driver, a stoic man named Marcus who had been with my family for 2 decades, held the door of the waiting Rolls-Royce Phantom open for me. As I slid into the cool, leather-scented interior, I saw a black SUV pull up to the gates. Richard's escorts had arrived. I felt a flicker of something. Not pity, but a detached clinical observation of cause and effect. This was the inevitable conclusion to the equation he had written. The drive to the private airfield at Van Nuys was silent. I watched the familiar, sun-drenched streets of Los Angeles slide by the tinted windows, the palm trees and sprawling mansions of a life I was leaving behind. It was like watching a movie of my own past. Each landmark, the restaurant where we had our first date, the theater where he proposed, the hospital where I'd sat with him all night after a minor surgery, was now just a set piece from a story about 2 people who no longer existed. At the airfield, the Gulfstream G700 sat shimmering on the tarmac, a magnificent silver spear aimed at the future. It wasn't our jet anymore. It was my jet. The flight crew, accustomed to Richard's blustering presence, greeted me with a quiet, respectful deference. They had already received their new orders, their new contracts. Their loyalty, like everything else in Richard's world, had been a commodity, and I had simply outbid him. As I stepped out of the car, the roar of another jet engine filled the air. On an adjacent tarmac, a smaller Learjet was being prepared. I saw her then, Sophia Dubois. She was standing beside a mountain of Louis Vuitton luggage, tapping impatiently on her phone. She was dressed for a tropical vacation in a white linen jumpsuit that showcased her tan in her youth. She looked up, her eyes scanning the airfield, no doubt searching for Richard's car, for the man who was supposed to be whisking her away to Anguilla. Our eyes met across the expanse of concrete. For a moment, there was just confusion on her face. Then as she took in the scene, me, the Rolls-Royce, the G700, the flight crew waiting for me, a slow, dawning comprehension washed over her features. Her perfect, pouty lips parted in a silent O of disbelief. I gave her a small, almost imperceptible nod, a final, dismissive acknowledgement. I had never spoken a word to her, and I never would. She was a footnote in my story, the catalyst for a change that was long overdue. Her own story, I imagined, was about to become significantly less glamorous. I boarded the jet without a backward glance. The cabin was a sanctuary of cream leather and polished burr walnut. The flight attendant, a woman with a calm, professional smile, offered me a glass of champagne. I asked for sparkling water with a twist of lime instead. I didn't want champagne. This wasn't a celebration. It was an extraction. As the jet taxied to the runway, I settled into my seat and looked out the window. My phone buzzed on the table beside me. It was a text from an unknown number. Probably Richard, making a desperate, pathetic plea from a borrowed phone. I powered my own device off and dropped it into my handbag. I wanted silence. I wanted a clean break. The engines roared to life, and the powerful aircraft surged forward, pressing me back into the soft leather of my seat. We lifted off the ground, a smooth, effortless ascent. The sprawling, glittering expanse of Los Angeles fell away beneath me. I saw the grid of the city, the winding freeways, the distant shimmer of the Pacific. It all looked so small from up here, so insignificant. A map of a place I used to know. As the jet banked eastward, chasing the sun, a profound and complex wave of emotion washed over me. There was the cold, hard satisfaction of justice served. There was the lingering, phantom pain of a decade of love and lies. But beneath it all, there was something new, something I hadn't felt in a very long time, a terrifying, exhilarating sense of possibility. My destination was not some cliched tropical paradise. Julian had arranged something far more discreet, far more secure. I was heading to a private estate on the shores of Lake Geneva, a place of quiet, old-world elegance, a place where I could be anonymous, a place where I could breathe. The future was a blank page, a vast, unwritten territory. I had no husband, no social obligations, no curated life to manage. I had my family's legacy, now fully and firmly back under my control. I had my freedom, and for the first time, I had myself. The flight attendant approached me. "Mrs. Worthington," she began, then hesitated. "It's Ainsworth," I said, my voice clear and firm. "Just Ainsworth," she smiled. "Of course, Miss Ainsworth. We'll be at cruising altitude shortly. Can I get you anything at all?" I looked out the window at the endless expanse of blue sky, at the curve of the earth on the horizon. I had everything I needed. "No, thank you," I said, a genuine smile touching my lips for the first time in what felt like a lifetime. "I'm perfectly fine." Richard Worthington's world did not just crumble, it ceased to exist. The silent, digital storm I had unleashed from Julian Croft's office was a financial neutron bomb. It vaporized the assets but left the man standing, blinking in the rubble of his own making. The security team that escorted him from the Bel Air estate was professional and impassive. They watched as he, in a daze, packed a single suitcase, his hands fumbling with the bespoke suits and silk ties that were the uniform of a life he no longer led. His credit cards were declined. The Uber he tried to call wouldn't accept his payment. In the end, he had to borrow $20 from the head of the security detail, a man whose salary had been paid by my family for years, just to get a taxi. It was the first of many humiliations. He went to his office at Ethelred Holdings, a place where his name had been spoken with the reverence usually reserved for deities. He found his nameplate gone from the door, his access card deactivated. The new interim CEO, a ruthless but brilliant woman handpicked by Julian, had him escorted out by security, a scene witnessed with barely concealed glee by the employees he had once ruled with an iron fist. He tried to fight back, of course. He hired a lawyer, a flashy Beverly Hills attorney known for getting tabloid-friendly results. But the lawyer's bluster and threats evaporated when faced with Julian Croft's fortress of meticulously documented evidence of fraud, embezzlement, and racketeering. The power of attorney was ironclad. The evidence of his financial crimes was overwhelming. His lawyer quietly advised him to walk away before he ended up in a federal prison. His calls to his high-powered friends, the titans of industry and finance with whom he had shared cigars and backroom deals, went unanswered. In the world we inhabited, power is everything, and Richard was now powerless. He was no longer a player, he was a liability, a cautionary tale whispered about at exclusive golf clubs and in hushed boardroom meetings. His black box, the hard drives and ledgers I had taken from his safe, became the centerpiece of an SEC investigation. Ethelred Holdings, under its new management, cooperated fully, exposing the full extent of Richard's crimes to avoid corporate liability. His name became synonymous with greed and spectacular failure. The glowing profiles in Forbes were replaced with scathing articles detailing his downfall. And what of Sophia, his true north? Their storybook romance, built on a foundation of my money and his lies, shattered the moment the resources dried up. He showed up at her luxury penthouse in Century City, desperate and broken. She, seeing not the charismatic billionaire, but a desperate, penniless man, refused to even let him in. The Porsche was repossessed the next day. The lease on the penthouse was terminated. Her influencer career, which had been turbocharged by the lavish lifestyle he provided, sputtered. The brands that had flocked to her, drawn by the allure of her connection to wealth and power, vanished. She was last seen by a former friend arguing with a landlord over a security deposit for a small apartment in the valley. The Le Coeur de la Mer, sapphire pendant, no doubt, had been sold for a fraction of its value. Their great love, it turned out, had a very specific price tag. Richard ended up living in a small rented condo in a faceless suburb, a place of stucco walls and shared swimming pools. The man who once flew to Monaco for the weekend now had to check his bank balance before buying groceries. He was a ghost, haunting the ruins of his own ambition, a king reduced to a commoner, tormented by the knowledge that he had held an empire in his hands and had let it all slip away for a fleeting, shallow fantasy. I received periodic, indirect updates from Julian. Not because I asked, but because he knew I deserved to know the final chapter. I never felt a sense of vindictive joy. Instead, I felt a kind of quiet, detached closure. His fate was not my victory, it was his creation. He had authored his own demise, sentence by painful sentence. My own story, however, was just beginning. In the quiet solitude of Lake Geneva, surrounded by the majestic, silent Alps, I began the process of rebuilding. Not my fortune, for that was secure, but myself. I shed the skin of Catherine Worthington, the perfect corporate wife, and reacquainted myself with Catherine Ainsworth, the woman who could read a balance sheet, who understood the language of power, and who was, for the first time, utterly and completely free. I took over the reins of the Ainsworth family office, not as a figurehead, but as an active, engaged leader. I discovered I had a talent for it, a passion for building things, not just maintaining them. Richard thought he was untangling himself from the Ainsworth Trust. In the end, he had only untangled me from him, setting me free to become the woman my father had always known I could be. He had wanted a sunset clause, an ending to our chapter, and in a way, he got it. The sun had set on his empire, on his arrogance, on his hollow life, and for me, on the other side of the world, a new sun was just beginning to rise. Catherine's story is a chilling reminder that the quietest person in the room is often the most powerful. It's a tale of devastating betrayal, but also one of incredible strength and the fierce, brilliant execution of a woman pushed too far. She didn't just get mad, she got everything. Her journey from a gilded cage to the cockpit of her own destiny is a masterclass in reclaiming one's power. What do you think? Was her revenge justified, or did she go too far? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We read every single one. If you were captivated by this story of intrigue and justice, don't forget to hit that like button, share this video with someone who loves a good story of triumph, and most importantly, subscribe to our channel for more real-life dramas that are stranger than fiction. You won't want to miss what we have coming next.